Hello, I'm Pete. In this video, I'm going to talk about the differences between British English and American English while walking through Ousbourne, which is part of Newcastle upon Tyne in northern England. This video is primarily intended to be used as English listening practice, so please don't forget to turn on the subtitles. When the video is released, subtitles will be available in English as well as English and Japanese simultaneously, so please make use of this feature to help you learn English. The topic of today's video is the difference between British and American English. As you can probably tell from my accent, I am English, so I speak British English. I don't have a particularly strong regional accent, but I don't speak with a posh RP accent either. It's quite a neutral English accent. I should say as well that British English and American English are incredibly similar. They are of course both English after all, so whichever you decide to learn, you'll be perfectly understood in the other country 99.99% of the time. It's for this reason that I hope that people can learn from my videos regardless of whether they want to learn British English or whether they want to learn American English. Of course though, those who want to learn British English and those who want to speak with a British accent will probably enjoy my videos more than those who would rather learn American English and learn to speak with an American accent. I'm going to begin by talking about the vocabulary differences between British English and American English. After that, I'll speak a little bit about accent differences and pronunciation differences between the two. And finally, I'll talk about the spelling differences. Some words are spelt slightly differently. You'll be pleased to know that there are virtually no grammar differences between the two variants of English whatsoever. If there were variants in grammar, it would actually be very difficult to be understood in America if you speak British English and vice versa. So thankfully there's not. After I've finished talking about the differences between British and American English, I'm going to visit a British restaurant and an American restaurant. I found online there's a nice looking American restaurant called Texas Smoker. That's a barbecue restaurant, so that looks really good. I'm looking forward to that. I think I'll also visit a fish and chips restaurant, which is of course very British. I'm sure that the person that I'll speak to in the American restaurant will be British. Ideally, I would like to speak to an American person, but I'm not sure where to find one in the UK to speak to. But anyway, I hope that you enjoy these conversations, so please don't forget to watch them at the end of the video. So I will start by talking about the vocabulary differences. There are not actually that many vocabulary differences, especially in the context of the number of words in the language. It would be a tiny percentage. Also, I think because American English is more widely spoken globally, I think that all British people understand the American word, but I'm not sure that American people necessarily understand the British word. So I'm sure that if you speak American English, you'll be perfectly understood in the UK, but maybe if you only know British English, Americans might not understand the British words for things. But anyway, let's get on to the words. I will also put a picture on the screen of the item in question, so maybe if you want to guess the British and the American words, you can pause the video and then have a guess before I say it. This is the first thing. In British English, we call it rubbish, whereas in American English, it's called either trash or garbage. These words aren't said, really, in the UK. If you say these words, you will sound very American. Next, what is this? In British English, this is a lift, whereas in American English, it's an elevator. What's this? In British English, it's a pavement, and in American English, it's a sidewalk. In British English, we call this a bonnet, whereas in American English, it's a hood. Sticking with the theme of the car, what's this? So in British English, we call this a boot, whereas Americans call this a trunk. And what are these things that you wear on your legs? In British English, they are trousers, and in American English, they are pants. In British English, pants are what you wear under your trousers, whereas Americans, I think, call these underpants, which is also a British English word. What's this? Most British people would call this a torch, whereas Americans call this a flashlight. And what is this baby wearing? In British English, we call this a nappy. Americans call this a diaper. And this? In British English, this is a car park. In American English, it's called a parking lot. What about this? In British English, this is a holiday, whereas in American English, this is a vacation. And this? These are chips in British English, whereas Americans either call them fries or French fries. And Americans call chips what British people call crisps. What about this? British people would call this a lorry, whereas Americans would call it either a truck or a semi. I have no idea why they call it a semi. A semi what? I'm not sure. Anyway, what would you fill your lorry with? In British English, you would fill it with petrol, and in American English, you would fill it with gas. Actually, that probably isn't true, because lorries run on diesel, not petrol. You would fill your car with petrol, or gas in American English. And gas is short for gasoline. It's definitely a liquid, not a gas. And what are the trains that run underground in cities called? Americans usually call it a subway. British people have a few words for it. We could either call it an underground, like the London Underground. We would call it a metro, or we would call it a tube, where tube is also a common name for the London Underground. What do you call the direction that is reverse to the way a clock goes? British people call it anti-clockwise, whereas American people call it counterclockwise. What do you call the season that comes after summer, but before winter? I think British people and American people say autumn, but American people sometimes say fall, whereas British people never say fall. And what about this? In British English, this is a biscuit, whereas in American English, this is a cookie. Cookie is also a British word, but to British people, a cookie is a chocolate chip cookie only. It's a type of biscuit. And then I think Americans call biscuits something crazy, like I think Americans call biscuits what we call scones. Anyway, that's a long story. And what about these? The general word for this in British English is sweets, whereas the word in American English is candy. And what about these buildings that I'm walking past now? What is the common name for compact city living? In British English, this is a flat, whereas in American English, it's an apartment. British people also say apartment, but it usually means a holiday house. Okay, and the last thing that I will say is this. So, in a building with multiple floors, British people usually say multiple floors, whereas American people usually say multiple stories. But that's not all I want to say. What would you call the very lowest floor? Because British people would call this the ground floor, whereas Americans would call it the first floor. And once you go up the stairs, this gets even more confusing, because then British people would call that the first floor, but Americans would call it the second floor. So if Americans come to English and if Americans come to England and they get told to go to the second floor, they might only go up one flight of stairs, whereas they should really go up two. There were quite a lot of words there. I might link in the description a more complete list. I think these are the most common ones. I'm sure there are many more than what I've said today, but I think I've covered all the major ones. I'll now move on to talking about the differences in accent and pronunciation between the two variants of English. Some of the most noticeable differences between British and American pronunciation is in the letters R and T. So for example, when R is at the end of a word, like in the word car, British people don't pronounce it properly. We just make it a long vowel, so car, car. Whereas Americans pronounce the R. So an American would say something like car, car. Excuse my very dodgy American pronunciation there. The same is also true with the letter T at the end of the word. But it's the other way around, and this time British people pronounce it, but Americans don't. So for example, the word cut. British people pronounce the T at the end, cut, but Americans don't. I think Americans say something like cut, 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 whereas British people say cut. What else is there? Ah yes, so also Americans often don't pronounce T properly when it's in the middle of a word. So for example, water. British people pronounce the T, but Americans, they don't just drop it, they also turn it into a D sounding thing, like a very soft D. So water would become water, water. Party would become party, party. Waiter would become waiter. Again, I'm very sorry for my dodgy American accent. And actually, very casually, British people might drop the T altogether. They might say water, or waiter, or party, or something like that. But proper English you would say water, waiter, party. Americans sometimes drop the T as well, especially when it comes after an N, such as in words like internet and centre. Americans would say something like internet, center. You'll notice that the T isn't properly pronounced, like internet, center. There's also a few exception words which British people and American people pronounce differently, that don't really follow any rules. These words are address, that would be the British pronunciation, whereas Americans would say address. It's just a different emphasis on the word. Again with adult, Americans would say adult. Apricot in British English would be apricot in American English. Brochure in British English would be brochure in American English. British people say controversy, whereas Americans say controversy. Another one is British people say garage, whereas Americans say garage. When you design something, British people will get it patented, whereas Americans will get it patented. British people follow a route, whereas Americans follow a route. And also, British people put their flowers in a vase, whereas Americans put their flowers in a vase. And lastly, the last letter of the alphabet, British people pronounce it Z, whereas Americans pronounce it Z. When doing research for these words, I found some which I think are now outdated. And British people say both the British version and the American version. For example, the word either. I think either is supposed to be the British pronunciation and either is the American pronunciation. But I myself say both of these, I think. So that's outdated. Another one is advertisement. I say advertisement, but apparently the British pronunciation is advertisement. I didn't know that though, so I think that's also outdated.
You just not got a good vibe, and I was like, you're gonna call.
I'll now briefly talk about the spelling differences between British and American English. Most spelling differences fall into a few groups, and there's not many groups, and there aren't really any exceptions to these groups. The first one is with words like colour, flavour, humour, labour. British people spell these words with a U between the O and the R, whereas Americans omit this U. The next pattern is in words like analyse, organise, and apologise. British people spell these words with an S, whereas Americans spell them with a Z. They are all the differences that I want to talk about in this video. But before the video ends, I want to give you some extra listening practice. Staying on the theme of the video, I'm going to show you me ordering some British food and some American food in the UK. Hey guys, can I have a dirty dog please?
Sure thing. Is that everything for you?
That's all, thanks, yeah.
Cheers. Now let's do this. Have you got an actual card? Are you paying by cash or by card?
Card.
We're having a bit of an issue with the contactless.
Right, okay,
So
oh,
if
I
you've got
can...
the actual card,
yeah, no worries, yeah.
Because more people just pay on their phones now, so
Yeah.
it's like...
I don't think I've typed the pin in for it, does it? I can remember it. so
Just whack it in the top.
in
there,
there,
yeah.
Is that...
Oh no, you've got it. Hang on, there you go. Sorry about.
Ah, right.
There you go. Yeah, sometimes you've got to get a bit of a pat.
No, store the secure shop.
Hi. Can I have a regular cod and chips, please? With curry sauce.
Take a few minutes.
No problem, thank you.
Curry sauce all over or separate?
On the side, please. Separate, yeah, thank you.
That's 70.
Can I pay with card? Okay.
You like some salt
Yes, please. How did you find those conversations? By the way, this bridge, the Millennium Bridge in Newcastle, is very unique because it lets boats through by tilting on its axis. I don't think there's another like it in the world. I'm sorry, by the way, if this video scared you a bit, because I talked about a lot of differences between British English and American English. There actually aren't many differences, but it seems like a lot, and they're all given in a list. I also wanted this video to be a fairly complete list of all the differences. You really shouldn't worry though about knowing the difference at all. It doesn't matter if you know a combination of British English and American English. No one cares at all. So just keep learning English the best you can, and you'll be able to speak in both the UK and America. Maybe you could already tell, but this video has been the first video on my channel where I have recorded the audio after filming. I'm actually speaking into a microphone in my bedroom now. Could you tell this? I'm interested to know, so let me know in the comments if you can. I decided to do a voiceover because it was a very detailed topic, and there was too much for me to remember to do it in person. In my future videos I'll go back to speaking while walking, but I wanted to test out this format where I talk about a more detailed topic. So please let me know what you think. Anyway, that's all for this video, so thank you very much for watching. My next video will be uploaded in 2 weeks' time, so see you then. Bye bye.